All right, man. So Kamala Harris has a secret. That's right. She has a secret. It's a secret weapon, and what's basically happening is the surge that she is exhibiting or that she is experiencing is a surge amongst a lot of young voters, a lot of minorities, etc., who are kind of not feeling Biden or Trump, a lot of the quote unquote double haters. And so what's ended up happening is the vibes are just crazy right now. I don't think it's really for any logical reason, but the vibes are just going through the roof right now, and so people are really excited to vote for Kamala Harris, which we haven't seen in probably since 2008, probably not even 2012. But 2016 was more or less sort of a lesser of two evils election between Trump and Hillary, and then 2020 was just a straight up, hey, F Trump, we just want to vote for Biden. In fact, we'll just let him stay in his bunker all day. We don't even care if he does interviews or anything. We're just going to go out and vote against Trump. But Kamala, on the other hand, is not like that. She's somebody that a lot of people are actually voting for. And so we look at the polls and we read the polls and everything, but the polls are often going to miss those people. They're going to miss those people. And so here you're going to see this CBS breakdown of what's going on. There's going to be like this analyst who's going to explain that there is a surge in registration among these demographics, young black women, young Latino women. I guess that's a little bit redundant, Latino women, just Latinas, right? And these young voters generally. And so you're going to see how this is really important. So we don't want to just look at the polls. We also want to look at, what are the demographic changes? How are these voter actions happening, etc. So go ahead and check this out, and we'll come back and talk about it.
We're tracking something really interesting going on right now. It's a surge in voter registration in key groups ahead of the November election. Among young black women, registration is up more than 175%. You heard that right, more than 175% in 13 states. That's compared to the same time in 2020. This, according to the data firm TargetSmart. Registration has also increased among young Latinas and black Americans. Tom Bonnier joins us now. He's a senior advisor at TargetSmart. Tom, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming in. 175%, can that possibly be right? You must have triple-checked this, or many more times than that.
You're right to repeat the number because I've more than triple-checked it. It's incredibly unusual to see changes in voter registration that are anywhere close to this. I mean, to remind people, 175% is almost tripling of registration rates among this specific group. You just don't see that sort of thing happen in elections normally.
And what does that tell us, if anything, about either enthusiasm, attention, propensity to vote for these newly registered participants?
Tells us a lot. The reason that we look at this voter registration data is because the polls will only tell us so much. The polls tell us how people are going to vote. They don't tell us if or who is going to vote. It's a big question. The best indicator of that is the actions that people are taking. Number one, registering to vote. Someone who says, I want to participate in this election. And so as we've seen these questions of which side has the advantage in intensity and enthusiasm, we look for changes in voter registration like this. People who are newly registered to vote are much more likely to vote on election day. So it not only means that there's a bigger pool of voters for either campaign to draw from and turn out on election day, but generally it's an indicator of a broader enthusiasm among that specific group. So people who are already registered to vote, who look like those voters who are registering to vote, tend to vote at higher rates when you see those surges in registration.
What do we know about Republican registration and men?
Well, for the longest time, really from 2000 forward, we were seeing Republicans winning the registration battle, so to speak, especially in key states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and elsewhere. You were seeing them register more voters. They had more intensity and enthusiasm. And so this is important because our analysis started on July 21st, which is the day that President Biden announced that he'll be withdrawing from the race, and Kamala Harris announced her candidacy. And so that moment seems to be a potential tipping point in this race where we're seeing suddenly Democrats saying, I'm fired up, I want to participate. And since then, you've seen Democrats out registering Republicans.
Now, anyone who does a quick Google search of your name will find out that you're a Democrat. But this is not Democratic or Republican data, and you don't care. What you care is what the data tells you.
The most important thing for us is getting the data right. And so when we run an analysis like this, it's publicly available voter registration data that comes from state election officials. We just take it and we run counts like this. When I was trying to answer an interesting question to me about whether or not we had seen some sort of tangible change in this election that I think a lot of people were feeling.
We can draw some conclusions from demographic data behind someone who registers to vote, but we can't be for certain. But some states do provide partisan information along with registration information. Anything to glean from that?
That's right. So we look at partisanship, as you say. Some states allow people to register with a party. Many do not. So we look at both. In the states that do not allow it, we actually model partisanship. But in those states where it's just partisan registration, we're seeing where prior to this point, July 21st, where we began our analysis, Democrats were about even with Republicans among new registrants. After this date, the gap has increased to close to 20 points in this sample of states. It's a huge increase.
I want to ask you something that overlays registration with polling. Can pollsters add these newly registered voters to their likely voter models? Will they? And if they don't, could they be missing something?
They should. It's difficult. The hardest thing for any pollster to do is to accurately construct a prediction of turnout. Who's going to vote? For a likely voter poll to be perfectly accurate, they have to predict a lot of different demographic groups perfectly. And no one can do that. The hardest thing for pollsters is when there's a lot of volatility in the electorate, when a lot of voters who didn't participate in prior elections come out to vote. Potentially, that's what we're seeing. At least this is an early indicator that we could have a lot of first-time voters. First-time voters generally aren't showing up in these polls. They're generally people who have not been that connected, and they're going to be harder for pollsters to reach.
Tom, I want you to tell the audience a story about Kansas and this data and what you learned in the abortion referendum that was on the ballot there.
Well, there was a similar question 2 years ago after the Dobbs decision, June 24th of 2022, which was how it would impact the electoral environment. The first test of that was a ballot initiative in Kansas that was expected to be very close. In the end, it wasn't. The pro-abortion rights position won by about 18 points. When we looked at the voter registration data to see who was registering in the lead up to that vote, we found something shocking. 70% of the people who were registering to vote were women. It showed that there was an intensity and enthusiasm. Now, in the end, that's what we saw carry through. It's the reason why there wasn't a red wave election, because of that impact from the Dobbs decision. So a similar registration analysis in Kansas, similar to what we're looking at here, showed to have a true impact on the election and be predictive of what would happen a few months later.
Yeah, so as you guys can just see there, man, he clearly broke down that there's a massive, massive registration surge going on amongst these groups. So, you know, we saw the numbers here. So it's saying 175.8% increase young black women, 149.7% increase with young Latinas, black women 98.4, black Americans 85.8, young women 83.7. And the black people are going to be really, really important. Blacks are really, really important for voting for the Democratic Party because they're actually the only ones that are like super liable to vote for Democrats. So they typically vote in the 90s in favor of Democrats. So it's like a legit 90% split. Whereas like even Hispanics, for example, are usually typically like 60-40, somewhere around there now, like 65-35, not 60-40. But so for young Latinas, it might be a little bit more in favor of Democrats, but like the black people are really huge. And then also like in the state of North Carolina, for example, they're going to be absolutely massive. Black people in North Carolina, black people in the state of Georgia, because there's still a lot of surging going on in those states for population growth. There's a lot of population growth. So a lot of black people are moving south from up north. So they're actually moving downwards to those states, and they're going to be the people that end up winning the election. And we saw a lot of overperformance from Biden in the Sun Belt states. So imagine, dude, if Biden overperforms his numbers, he overperformed by 0.9 points in Georgia and by 0.7 in Arizona, which is the only reason he was able to win the election. Only God can tell what kind of an overperformance there's going to be for Kamala Harris, because it's going to be hard for them to be able to get these people in their polls. It's going to be hard for them to talk about it. And you could see how he mentions the Kansas abortion ballot thing, right? And so how there was this large surge and that was correlated with this huge voter registration surge. These people are just going to be missed by the polls. And so if they can come out more and create themselves as a larger share of the total electorate, it'll really increase the impact in a way where it's actually even going to miss it in the poll numbers. So like, you know, in these poll numbers where we see this, where, you know, Harris at 47 or 44 or 49 or whatever, or we look specifically at a state like North Carolina, for example, and, you know, Trump is plus 0.3, you know, in a poll where she's at 47 or 46, she's probably being underestimated. There's probably a lot of the vote out there, like 1 or 2%, that she's actually being missed of, especially in a state like Georgia where so much, I think like 30% of the population is black, right? So if so much of that is black, a lot of these numbers are going to be underestimated. And so it's not just about looking at the polls. Polls are kind of one piece of the puzzle, but we also have to look at things like voter registration data. And then again, just remember, this is the first time where people feel like they're really voting for someone since 2008. And we know that, obviously Obama was able to bring out a lot of people. And so for this kind of a boost, there's likely going to be this huge surge for Kamala Harris that gets completely missed, similar to how it happens for Trump. Trump, I think, also is going to overperform his poll numbers because, Trump almost always overperforms his poll numbers by at least 3%. But Harris will be able to fight that because it's definitely possible, especially in a lot of the swing states, that you get both overperformances. It doesn't have to be overperformance by one and not the other. It can actually be overperformance from both. So I think it's probably going to happen where both of them overperform because Trump, it depends on where he's at in the poll numbers. I think if he's at like 43, 44, around there, he's definitely going to overperform. If he's already at like 49, 50, I don't think he's going to overperform at all, if by much. But Harris is definitely going to overperform. So this is her secret weapon. The secret weapon for Kamala Harris is going to be these people. I did read that she's actually trying to start up some voter registration drives. This is super important. He also said that, the people who have just registered to vote are actually the most likely to vote, which is absolutely massive. So in a state like North Carolina, where, for North Carolina, we see these numbers, man, I mean, Hillary loses by, almost 4 points. It really is higher, though, because Gary Johnson is definitely going to net out more votes from Trump than Hillary. So it's really more like a 5-point deficit. And then Biden only loses by 1.4 points. I mean, it's so much smaller. There's no way that this kind of thing is not going to play so big. It's going to be huge. And it's probably likely why North Carolina is going to go. We already see the general trend. But then you also get like this hidden vote that's going to come in. It's just going to be absolutely massive. So I think we can't just look at the polls. We also have to look at what's going on with the voter registration and everything. And this kind of makes Kamala a different beast than Hillary and Biden, where it's like, whoa, people are really going to come out to vote for her instead of just against the other person. So it's going to be pretty interesting, and definitely let me know your thoughts on this down below.